In this video we're going to be taking a look at cropping, straightening and transforming our images. I've decided to place all three options together because each of them have some relationship with each other. But before we do any cropping, straightening or transforming of an image, the very first thing I would do would be to fix the lens corrections first. Now the image you can currently see open in Adobe Camera Raw is a good example why we need to do the lens corrections first. If you look at the horizon here, I'm sure you can see without me pointing it out that we've got a tilt up at the left, a dip in the middle and a tilt up at the end. We've actually got a very shallow curve with the lowest point in the middle. Now if we look up at the extreme top right of the screen, you'll see that the lens used was a 24 to 105mm zoom, but for this image it was set at its widest end of 24mm. And because I'm looking up a little bit to get the majority of the sky in shot, that's caused that slight curve in the horizon. But we know that when we go to the lens correction options and we would remove chromatic aberration, but the one I'm really interested in is the enable profile corrections, if I tick that box and if you can look at the horizon as I do, you can see how that change straightened things up. It may straighten up the curve, it may not straighten up any tilt we have with the image. Let's go up to our crop tool just for a moment. I don't want to do cropping just yet, I just want to use the guides that come with it. I'm going to pick up the crop and I'm just going to drag out a shape, and what I want to do is I want to draw your attention to the horizon and this straight line, because when I put this straight line just touching the horizon on the right hand side, now you can see how it's drifting downwards here. So clearly our image needs to be rotated very slightly to the right. I'll hit the escape key to come away from that crop tool. There's a couple of ways to level up that horizon line. We can do it manually, or we can have a look at the automatic setting. If I move my cursor up and over the straighten tool, the tooltip says straighten tool, double click to straighten automatically. So what I'm going to do is just that, and look at the job it does. A quick look at that bottom line of the rule of thirds tells us that it's just about perfect, and of course the crop is in place. So if I just wanted to move my crop up a little bit to put the horizon in that classic rule of thirds position, then I can do so, and of course to finish the job we would just touch the enter key and then we could continue with the manipulation. Remembering all of the time of course that we're never ever, when we're working with a raw image, locked in to the crop tool, because all we've got to do is reselect it and we can adjust it at any time. Now what I've just done with this image is to reset the camera raw defaults. We can do that from this little icon at the top right, and there's the setting that I used. So I've taken this back to the original image you saw when I first opened it. So I want to go back and just retick those two boxes, because if we tried to use the automatic leveler and it didn't work to our satisfaction, then we may want to turn to the manual setting. It's the same tool, we just pick up the tool, we get a little icon which symbols or shows us which tool we've got selected. Now all I've got to do, and I can zoom in to do this, it's sometimes useful to do that, we can zoom in and we can pick the edge that should be straight, and we can say to Photoshop by drawing a line, make sure that that horizon is straight, and if I hit Control 0 to fit the image on screen, there you can see very much the same thing we got. when we tried the automatic settings. Now sometimes the automatics will work a treat, sometimes they won't. But I have to say with Photoshop the automatic tools are getting better and better. And of course to commit this we do the same thing as we did before. We just touch the enter key and then we can proceed with our image editing. Let me go back up to the top left and reselect the crop tool. There's not a great deal we can say about this tool. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I'll just hit the escape key to back away from that for a moment, because if we click and hold the bottom right corner of the tool we do have a number of presets. So if we were looking to produce a square image then we'd choose 1:1, and we've got a number of presets here. One that may be quite important to us is 16:9. I'll select that here because 16:9 is the size of most of our PC screens, Mac screens, laptop screens and televisions. It's also the same size as the video you're watching, and YouTube, well, it's becoming pretty standard. But when I click and drag now, I am locked in to that 16:9 shape. And you'll notice that now I haven't got a little box in the center top, center bottom or left and right to be able to adjust it widthways or in height, because I'm locked into that 16:9 aspect ratio. I'll hit the escape key once again to come out of that, and I'll go back to the tool and reselect normal. Now I can't think of very much more I need to say about the crop tool. I think if we click and drag and just take a small selection for a moment, of course we can go outside of the bounding box and we can rotate the image, and that can be very good for creative reasons in certain circumstances, and even from there we can still drag out the edge. But you'll notice that when I get to the top left of the image, when it touches the top of the screen, it will not break out, so it limits what I can do with the image once I get to that point. Now if you're familiar with doing cropping within Photoshop, you may be aware that that's not the case there. We can actually crop outside of the picture space, but not within Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to hit the escape key once again. When we have an image like this on screen in Adobe Camera Raw, we could be looking at doing some cropping, straightening and transforming the verticals too. Now we've looked at cropping, we've looked at straightening. We know the effect that lens corrections have. Now although we haven't got a dead straight horizon here, or it's difficult to actually pick out the horizon, I think I can still detect that dip in the middle. And looking up just below the histogram, I can see a 28mm lens was used. So let's go to the lens corrections, remove chromatic aberration, tick the box, let's see what it does to the picture. There, it does a good job, and we can, once it jumps, we can see that we were right in seeing that slight curve down in the middle. So that's the first stage of what we need to do. But what I'd like to do next is to take a look at straightening the image. We could try that auto setting. Let's see what it does. I've just double clicked it. Now it seems to have done a reasonably good job there, but what I may do here is escape that and do something completely different. I'm going to go up to this option here and choose my transform tool. When I do that, way over on the right hand side, all of the options open up, and at the top of this window we've got a series of automatic settings. This one is to disable any of the changes we make. Automatic, fix the levels, fix the uprights, fix the levels and uprights, and this one is a guided tool to help us, and I find this one works much better for me, but we'll look at that in a moment. And as well as the automatic settings, we've got loads of sliders here which will help us to make any adjustments we see fit. Not forgetting, of course, we can reset any of these simply by just double clicking and they'll snap back to their default position. So let's take a quick run through here by selecting the automatic. Does a job, certainly straightens things up a little bit, but I'm not too keen on what it does over here. This one's going to do the levels. That doesn't do a bad job. Let's go back to this option and we can see the difference. You can just see it rotate slightly, which is what we did a little bit earlier on with the leveler at the top left. Now we can look at the uprights. Not too keen on that. It's making these pillars lean out a little bit. Let's try both. We'd need to do a bit of cropping here, but of course if we ever use these tools and it leaves gaps around the edge, we can go down to the scale and we can move the image up, but of course the content of the image is going to determine if that's possible. On this occasion I'll double click and reset, because I think I'm going to have a look at doing this with the guided option. Now the reason I like this so much is because I can select it and I need to draw two lines, so I need to tell Photoshop what I need to be straight. Now we can always zoom in and do this a little bit more effectively, but of course once we select a tool like this, how do we zoom in? We'd have to go up to the extreme top left of the screen and select the zoom tool, zoom in, then reselect the guided transform tool. But there's another shortcut that's worth writing down to remember. Control and spacebar. If we press those two keys together, you can see that the tool I previously had is just temporarily removed. I can then click into my picture and get the picture much bigger to be able to see the straight edge I'd like to use. And when I release those keys, I'm back to my guided tool. So I'm going to draw a line down here. I'm going to say that building there, the edge of that building should be straight. Nothing's going to happen yet until we do the next one. Now I'm going to use another shortcut, that spacebar, to click and drag, because I think I'm going to look at making one of these straight. May not be perfect first time, but as I release the spacebar I can click and drag, and there you can see what I've done. You can see a dramatic change to the picture, but because we're zoomed in we can't see it very well. So another shortcut worth writing down. Control 0 fits our image onto the screen. Now the reason I like to use the guided option is I can go to the little pin at the bottom here or at the top, and I can just slide it a little bit one way or the other. So if I feel that what I've made upright doesn't look quite right, because sometimes if you've got a tapered pillar like we have here, it may not need to be entirely upright. We can actually make a slight adjustment until we're happy with it. And even if I didn't get things right here, I can do the same there. I can lean them one way or another to get just the effect that I'm looking for. I can drag it down to make it a bit easier to move, and I can just rock it to the right or rock it to the left to get the effect I want. And when I'm happy, then I can move on from that position. Just looking at that, I'm being very critical here, but it's quite a nice picture and I think it's worth just a little bit of effort. Now when you're working with a picture in Camera Raw, at any time you like, and I'm looking at that column there and I find I want it to go the other way a little bit, that's better. At any time you like, you can go down here and just click Done. And when you click Done, the picture will disappear from the screen. But what I've done is just lock those changes into the thumbnail. If I go down to my bottom bar and bring up Bridge once again, I can then reopen this picture and it'll have all of the changes that we made just a few moments ago. It's quite handy when sometimes you're part way through a manipulation and have to leave the computer. Now we didn't actually follow through on leveling the picture up, so let me try this again. Let me just double click the level. Now it's not doing quite as well as it did before, and that's interesting, but I can escape from that because I know I can just pick up that tool there and say, well, I think that bit there needs to be straight. So you can see how much the image needs to be rotated. How's that going to affect my uprights? There you can see it. It looks pretty good. But I'm not sure that I want that little light bit here, so this is where I would probably reselect the crop and I would just fine tune it. So the crop tool, the straightening tools and the transform tools, these are three of those small steps or stages within our global editing that we need to deal with when appropriate. None of them are significant on their own, but they can be, as I've said many times, when we see them all strung together. A number of small steps, and when you think about the image we have on screen, we haven't even begun to start any of the real manipulation yet. But what I could do just to bring this little part to a close is to go up to the top right and choose Reset Camera Raw Defaults. And now you can see we're back to our curve, our sloping horizon and our leaning verticals. Now there's all sorts of images where we can make use of these tools. Here you can see a picture of a Scottish loch. Remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. That deals with most of the curve, but we've got a wicked lean on the left hand side. We don't notice it so much on the right because we're looking at an indistinct row of hills. But what I tend to do here personally is to work with that guided tool. So let's quickly go to the top left of the screen, pick up the transform tool, go to my guided options and then zoom in using that little shortcut that I mentioned earlier on. And I'm going to use the edge of the church tower there as one, and over here I'll use the edge of this building here and see if that's going to work well. Control 0 to fit the image on screen, and there you can see we've got a pretty good result. But we can also turn to the options now just below those automatic settings. You'll notice that we've got an offset X and an offset Y, so I can choose to move the image one way or another if I wanted to. But I can also use that option to scale, so I could just creep up the picture until those little edges have gone, and there we have the picture nicely straightened. Now here's another image where we're going to want to maybe correct the verticals on the left and on the right. One of the things we can do, I did demonstrate the tool up at the top left to level horizons, but in actual fact if we select it I can draw a line and tell Photoshop to make that part of the picture vertical. Now when I hit the enter key it will do that, but of course at the expense of the right hand side. I'm sure we can get it a little better than that. So let me go back to my crop and escape from that, and I'll turn to the transform tools. Now we can look at the automatic. Let's take it back. We can look at the uprights. That doesn't look too bad either, but of course we still have the guided tool. So if we needed to use that, select it. We can pick a couple of areas. I'll stay with that part there and say to Photoshop that part there should be straight, and let's go straight down this column over on the right hand side. And then once we've got it in place we can take a careful look just in case we want to swing any of these one way or another. And we've also got the problem here where we're going to need to either crop the image, because we could just crop within those areas bottom left and bottom right, but we can also scale it. Now we can put the cursor in the box here. You can see the cursor flashing. Then I can use my up and down arrow keys to just nudge the image. So if I want to do it that way, sometimes I just find that a little bit more convenient. I've got quite a wide column on the left hand side, I may even investigate to see if I can slide the image one way or another. Let's see the effect of that. I'll just press and hold. See, to do that I've got to reveal a little bit down the bottom right. So that's a bit of a disappointment, but if you don't try these things you never gain much at all. So it looks as though that's what we're going to need, but of course what we may decide to do here is maybe crop it, because we do seem to have quite a lot on the left hand side there. So I could decide to apply a crop here, maybe come down a little bit to give me a nice shape, hit the enter key and maybe move forward with something like that. Here we are in the heart of Sydney, Australia, and sadly the monorail is no longer there. It's been taken down. You can see the buildings leaning in the background. Now sometimes when we look up at tall buildings, it's the lean of the buildings that give our image the power and interest we're looking for. But there are times when it doesn't. What I'm going to do here is just let the automatics take over. So I'm just going to select the A, and you can see it does a pretty good job of straightening everything up. Now the automatic settings have done a good job here, and I'm not sure we could have done much better manually. But if you look at the gold top tower over in the top center left, you'll notice that we've lost the top of the spire on the top. Now it's not a big deal, but sometimes it can be. So perhaps we could look at the offset Y here and bring the image down. So if I just place my cursor in the box and use my up arrow, is it? Down arrow. You'll notice the picture goes a bit fuzzy as it's moving. That's the way Photoshop works. But you'll notice that if I want to get the top of that spire in, I'm going to lose a little bit at the top left. Well, in actual fact, the subject of these videos is Adobe Camera Raw, but in Photoshop we have a tool called Content Aware, and that is so powerful I think I can replace all of those pixels at the top left in a couple of seconds. So what I'm going to do to bring this video to a close is just to do just that. I'm going to open this image up into Photoshop to start with. Here we are in Photoshop, and I'm going to pick up my Polygonal Lasso tool from the toolbox. I'm going to draw a line along the edge of that, or those missing pixels, up the top, back, join up. Then go to Edit, Fill, Content Aware, Control D to remove the selection. I think we'd get away with that pretty well.